Actor and musician Tyrese Gibson recently sued the Home Depot, alleging that employees of the store discriminated against he and his contractors as they were attempting to make a purchase from the store. Well, the Home Depot has now responded to the complaint, and their allegations are a little different than what Tyrese had to say. Let's have a look. Before we get into the Home Depot's answer to the complaint, let's have a little refresher as to what Tyrese alleged in his complaint. So we're going to go over just 3 paragraphs. So paragraph number 17 begins, on the evening of February 11th, 2023, Gibson, Hernandez, and Mora approached the cashier's register together to complete the purchase of materials for an ongoing project at Gibson's residence. The cashier was very slow scanning items and the process took 20 minutes. Then the cashier insisted that all items be rescanned because of a purported glitch in the system. While the cashier reran the scanning of the merchandise, a process that extended another 20 minutes, Gibson was approached by shoppers who recognized him from his roles in motion pictures. Not wanting to create a disturbance in the store with his fans, Gibson decided it would be better to wait in his vehicle, which was parked outside. Gibson communicated to the cashier that he would proceed to the parking lot and that Mora and Hernandez would be completing the purchase transaction with his credit card. The cashier acknowledged Gibson and said he understood. Gibson asked the cashier if the cashier needed anything further from him to complete the transaction. The cashier said no, and that Gibson could leave. However, when Mora and Hernandez presented Gibson's credit card to pay for the materials, the cashier refused to complete the purchase transaction. Mora and Hernandez called Gibson using FaceTime video and passed the phone to the cashier. Gibson, appearing on video, again authorized the purchase transaction. Now, based on these allegations, Gibson is essentially alleging that the refusal of the cashier to permit the transaction, given that he had already communicated to the cashier that the transaction was to proceed even though he wasn't going to be present in the store, and then again permitted the transaction using his credit card via the FaceTime video, constituted discrimination. Home Depot does not agree. Home Depot, in response to paragraphs 17 through 19, had this to say. In response to paragraph 17 of the complaint, Home Depot denies the allegations contained in paragraph 17 of the complaint, except that A, plaintiffs visited the Home Depot retail store in West Hills on February 11, 2023, and B, plaintiffs approached the register, first plaintiffs Mora and Hernandez, followed by plaintiff Gibson shortly thereafter, to begin a transaction. However, as evidenced by the security surveillance footage, plaintiffs did not complete this first transaction. Based on information and belief, plaintiffs left the register to continue to shop while the cashier number 1, finished scanning plaintiffs' items. After cashier number 1 finished scanning the items outside the presence of plaintiffs, cashier number 1 suspended the transaction as plaintiffs continued shopping. The surveillance footage does not show plaintiff Gibson communicating with cashier number 1. It is specifically denied that plaintiff Gibson identified himself to cashier number 1 or that he provided any instruction or request to cashier number 1 regarding payment for the items. Approximately 25 minutes later, plaintiffs returned to the register with additional items. Cashier number 1 was no longer present, and a second cashier number 2, assisted the plaintiffs with their previously suspended transaction and the additional items. The surveillance footage does not show plaintiff Gibson communicating with cashier number 2. It is specifically denied that plaintiff Gibson communicated with or identified himself to cashier number 2, or that he provided any instruction or request to cashier number 2 regarding payment for the items. The surveillance footage shows plaintiff Gibson taking candy from a nearby display and appears to show him presenting the candy to cashier number 2. Cashier number 2 looks to plaintiff Hernandez and or Mora for authority to include the candy in the transaction. So from this, we gather that it is Hernandez and Mora who are conducting all of the entirety of the transaction here, and The cashier number 2, assumes that Hernandez and Mora are the ones carrying on the transaction. And therefore, Gibson would have to ask them for permission to include the candy bar in the transaction, as they're the ones who are supposedly paying for this. Cashier number 2 scans the candy presented by Plaintiff Gibson. Plaintiff Gibson immediately leaves the store and does not separately pay for his candy. Cashier number 2, in the presence of Plaintiffs Mora and Hernandez, continues to scan items. Thereafter, a third cashier, cashier number 3, steps in to assist cashier number 2 with scanning and bagging items. After several minutes, cashiers numbers 2 and 3 finish scanning the items, total the transaction, and communicate the total to Plaintiffs Mora and Hernandez. As confirmed by video surveillance footage, Plaintiff Gibson was not present at the time the transaction was totaled. Plaintiff Gibson was not present when cashier number 3 arrived to assist with the transaction, and therefore had no communications with her until he initially communicated with her on FaceTime. Now, the rest of these are just denials of things that Gibson had to say in his complaint. But then we get down to paragraph number 19. 18 is pretty much a regurgitation of 17. In response to paragraph 19 of the complaint, Home Depot denies the allegations contained in paragraph 19 of the complaint. As confirmed by video surveillance footage, as the transaction was being totaled, Plaintiff Hernandez retrieved a credit card from his wallet and provided it to cashier number 3 as payment. Based on information and belief, Plaintiff Gibson FaceTime communicated with Plaintiff Hernandez, and then Plaintiff Hernandez proceeded to give the phone to cashier number 3. Plaintiff Gibson argued that he was providing identification via the FaceTime call. Thereafter, the surveillance footage shows a manager speaking with Plaintiff Gibson. The surveillance footage shows that once Plaintiff Gibson presented a valid form of identification, the transaction was completed. So as you can see, this differs greatly. The Home Depot's account of the events differ greatly from Gibson's account of the events. For one thing, Gibson only identifies one cashier. One cashier was apparently involved in the entire transaction from the beginning, when he alleges that there was a glitch in the system, up until the end when he comes back into the store and has to speak to someone. However, the Home Depot says there were actually 3 cashiers. The first did the ran up the items initially. The second cashier ran up the items a second time after the plaintiffs had left the line to go continue shopping. And then a third cashier is the one who was engaged in the FaceTime video. So if that is based on the video surveillance footage from the store, then Gibson seems to have gotten some of the facts wrong in his complaint when he alleged that he communicated to the cashier that he would be paying for the transaction with his credit card and getting permission from the cashier to then leave the store, and that the cashier didn't need anything additional from Gibson in order to proceed with the transaction. If in fact there were 3 different cashiers, there would be no way for Gibson to have communicated with the first or second cashier and then had the FaceTime conversation with a different cashier and everyone be aware of what was going on. So again, there are some discrepancies here. And if what Home Depot is alleging is based on video surveillance footage, it doesn't look like Mr. Gibson is going to have a very easy time proving the allegations in his complaint. But, we'll see what happens. Let me know what you think in the comments below. For now, my name is Nathan Saunders, and this is The Legal Good.